For thousands of years, people have wondered about the universe. Did it stretch out forever, or was there a limit? From the Big Bang to black holes, from dark matter to a possible Big Crunch, our image of the universe today is full of strange-sounding ideas.
How lucky we are to live in this time, the first moment in human history when we are, in fact, visiting other worlds. A still more glorious dawn awaits, not a sunrise, but a galaxy rise, a morning filled with 400 billion suns. The rising of the Milky Way. A still more glorious dawn awaits, not a sunrise, but a galaxy rise, a morning filled with 400 billion suns. The rising of the Milky Way. The surface of the Earth is the shore of the cosmic ocean. Recently, we've waded a little way up, and the water seems inviting.
Big History attempts to reconstruct the history of the whole of time, back to the very beginning of the universe, an account of the past from the very beginnings of time to the present day, based on the conclusions of modern scientific scholarship. It is useful to think of big history as a modern scientific origin story. Stories about how everything was created. The story seems to start simply, with the simplest ingredients. And as the wise Professor Carl Sagan may have said, like making an apple pie, ingredients combine in interesting ways to create something entirely more complex than the ingredients themselves. So, we've invented the universe, and we want apple pies. I am a student myself. History courses always wanted me to remember dates, names, places, events. Big history provides a timeline as long as time itself upon which to place all history you may learn in the future. In this sense, you can relate all historical events to events that have occurred since the beginning of time as we understand it, all the way to the present day. For example, when were microscopes invented and telescopes? What about the internet? Instead of summarizing big history for you, I'm going to deviate a bit and present some interesting ideas from the study of big history that may get you thinking about life, the universe, and everything. Please forgive any errors I may make. I am still but a student with Socratic aporia, an understanding that I know very little. Well, let's start this story with us. As you might know from biology class, all life on this planet is made up of cells. Look here. These are my cells, cells from the inside of my cheek that have been stained with methylene blue. You can see the nuclei of my cells, and those dark speckles are little bacteria. The cell. That seems to be the unit of life, the level at which what we call life emerges, comes about, becomes observable. If we lyse a cell, that is, destroy, dissolve its membrane, its contents spill out into the environment. There, metabolism may continue for some time. But is that material alive? Curious. you may have learned a cell is made up of biomolecules, which are themselves made up of elements from the periodic table. It seems as though everything heavier than hydrogen, which is a single proton and a single electron with 0 neutrons, was combined much like the ingredients of a recipe within the cores of stars in a process called nuclear fusion. Nuclear fusion creates elements heavier and more complex than hydrogen by first combining hydrogen with itself. Soon we have planets to live on and life starts, but before we get there, consider some ideas about the origin of science, the perspective from which we are telling this story. There was a cosmic egg. Inside the egg, two forces of yin and yang were perfectly balanced. But there was also Pangu. When Pangu emerged, he swung an axe and broke the egg in two parts. Thus, he separated yin and yang. Yin became the earth, and yang became the sky. He pushed it upward and made the sky grow thicker. As he pushed upwards and the sky grew thicker, he himself grew taller. The same thing happened when he pushed downwards. The earth became thicker, and he grew even taller. This process took 18,000 years. In some accounts, Pangu was assisted by the four most important animals of Chinese mythology: the dragon, the turtle, the phoenix, and the mythical Kylin, which is similar to the unicorn of Western mythology. Pangu himself was half human and half animal in his form. His body had hair like an ape, and he had horns on his head. Because he grew along with the sky and the earth, Pangu eventually became a giant. Pangu died after 18,000 years, and his body parts turned into different parts of the earth. Clouds and wind emerged from his breath. The sun came out of his left eye, the moon his right eye. Rivers were formed from his blood. Thunder came from his voice. Mountains formed from his head. The stars formed from the hair on his face. His bones became minerals and diamonds. It is highly impressive when one adjusts for the lack of knowledge to hear the creation myths of human beings who lived approximately 4,000 years ago, regardless of where on the surface of the earth they happen to live. The reasoning that must have been required to create such stories, specifically without the 17th century understanding of cells that arises from the emergence of the microscope. See Robert Hooke and Antony van Leeuwenhoek. This indicates that human beings are quite remarkable in their ability to observe their environment and present their cohesive interpretations to each other, accounting for disparate pieces of information. What I like to call religious philosophy, or proto-science, must agree with the first principles or religious paradigm of a particular time period. Individuals like Ptolemy and Mikolaj Kopernik, who you may know as Nicholas Copernicus, presented ideas that were not necessarily based in pure religious doctrine or in what we now call science, but had a foot in both arenas, to use a metaphor, idiom analogy. They used rationality, reasoning, logic, and made their ideas agree with religious beliefs, seemingly without questioning their origin. Eventually, Galileo Galilei starts a movement away from religious belief and into what we now call science. This is seen as dangerous and threatening during his time period based on the reactions of religious figures at the time reported in recorded history. However, we as human beings benefit from an increase in scientific knowledge and the resultant technologies that it produces. For example, a communication device when religion dominates is the prophet, who speaks to a deity and perhaps may create magic sticks or magic devices that allow one to commune with such a deity if the prophet doesn't desire to hold authority over others. Eventually, we as humans enjoy the communication technologies that arise from the understanding and application of physics, electricity, electromagnetic radiation, etc. Human beings can now speak to each other and appear to be communicating with deities, invisible beings that others can't perceive. There are rocks all around us. They are so common, ubiquitous, that I still often overlook them. I became interested in rocks through my aquarium and took a course on geography at York University during my first undergrad. I didn't end up with a great grade, but I came to understand that each rock has a story, and so too do geographic features in our environment, meandering rivers, mountains, etc. When our Professor Gus brought granite, marble, and sandstone to class, I was reminded of this course I had taken. Specifically, I remember bringing a duffel bag full of aquarium rocks to class to talk to the professor about. It was a heavy bag, but I was a young and strong lad with big muscles at the time. To me, the most interesting rock that Gus brought in that day was the sandstone because it contained an impression of a fossil. Now, I had seen fossils at museums before, but not like this. And I certainly hadn't touched one before, so I was excited to finally have it in my hands and to look at evidence of life far, far beyond the time scale that I would ever be able to experience as a human being. Given the billions of years that have passed since the emergence of early life on Earth, I am reluctant to believe that this prototypic, this early life that existed those billions of years ago may still be found unchanged on Earth today. Nature imposes selective pressures on life for quite some time before sexual pressures or artificial pressures become important. These ideas may sound familiar. That's because they're the ideas of Charles Darwin, who in his book Origin of the Species explains to us evolution, which is changes in organisms over a long period of time, many generations. Prototypic life may only exist in the imaginations of human beings for now. Exploration of space may yield new discoveries in the future, however. With that understanding, the solutions that nature produced to solve the problem of inheritance, what we call genetics, may have been relatively quite simple, relatively unsophisticated, and relatively inaccurate. Horribly inaccurate by today's standards. However, this chaotic emergence of proteins that interact with nucleic acids or other biomolecules that perhaps no longer exist in life as we know it today produce something capable of propagating itself. Imagine hundreds of possible amino acids, hundreds of possible nucleic acids, hundreds of possible lipids, and hundreds is just an arbitrary number. Imagine hybridized biomolecules that defy our classifications. Imagine what we understand about biology today being only the understanding of what has survived selective pressures of billions of years. Billions! Ha 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 ha! Ah, we know nothing! Well then, whether it was a proto-soup, or a proto-sludge, or many disparate environments, chaotically and unintentionally solving the problems of metabolism and inheritance and replication, etc. These eventually produce a serendipitous, fortunate phenomenon we call life. Perhaps, just perhaps, just perhaps, yes, perhaps. In the human mind, in your mind, in my mind, now exists the capability to conceive of such proto-life. Yes, it is amazing to think about, isn't it? Isn't it? Imagine what we may observe in the coming decades and centuries of space exploration ahead of us. Or perhaps just in our imaginations for the time being, if it turns out that Earth is quite remarkable, quite special, quite unique in allowing the emergence of what I see as the highest form of complexity we understand. That is, the ability of the universe to look back at itself and try to understand what it sees. Yes, we are cosmic beings. We are essentially the universe looking back at itself. It was interesting to see and hold the various 3D printed skulls of our distant ancestors. Even though one could see single-celled life as also being ancestral to us, there is something almost primal about seeing a skull. I often joke that no self-respecting human being that wishes to brood can do so without owning a human skull. It doesn't have to be real. Fake skulls are okay. To see the tools that our ancestors used, and having their crafting explained to us gave me an appreciation for the thoughtfulness and deliberate nature of their forms, not to mention the patience and knowledge that our ancestors must have had in order to craft and refine such tools to their liking. To look upon rocks in their environment and to see those rocks as tools and then to use them to craft other tools requires quite a considerable amount of something I have no name for. But the human mind is remarkable once educated, and it is hard to believe generation after generation of these ancient ancestors would come to such understandings without the ability to communicate with each other, to teach, and to learn from one another. It is difficult growing up today to imagine life without farming. There are two theories. The Einstein theory suggests that one individual is all that is needed to change a group of human beings, in this case, from hunting animals and gathering edible plants, hunting and gathering, to one that decides to grow their own plants where they decide to live. Wouldn't you want to live near a river, let's say, to drink from, to bathe in, and maybe somewhere that feels safe or is inspiring to wake up in? The spiritual roots theory suggests that the desire to remain in one place for rituals, for worship, etc., explains why farming emerges in various groups of human beings. Maybe if our ancestors used their time to make tools and this required the passing on of knowledge to children, etc., maybe, just maybe, they need to have safe places to learn, to teach, to craft, also became factors in the emergence of agriculture, farming, the rise of the agrarian era. I understand currency to be a universal or central resource, a resource that can change any other resource, be it a raw material, the time others have, food, etc., into itself in order to obtain any other resource one desires. So, currency has a function that is quite ingenious and useful. However, when one sees the concentration of currency in the ownership of single human beings, or even in small groups of human beings, one wonders what brings about such a phenomenon. We have confrontational and oppositional combative terms like greed or selfishness, but these alone don't fully explain the uneven distribution of resources on Earth. When you read in English, you probably don't think too much about the alphabet. Well, neither did I until I started learning new languages. I began to see how strange it actually is to write, read, and speak English. When we wrote in cuneiform on soft clay in class with impressions made with popsicle sticks, I thought to myself, this is how they represented sounds? And I found it quite odd. Human beings would have used so many impressions to represent such simple sounds. But I know this perspective comes from having learned English. When looking at our own alphabet, which comes from Latin, and our numbers, which come from Arabic, I find it refreshing to learn other human languages because it shows me how truly arbitrary, man-made, sometimes without any real logic or reason, alphabets or writing systems can be. I know a little bit of Japanese. Here goes. 俺は新しい世界の子供。お前は学生ですか？お前はよくの大学生です。よかった。ことはでも、少しだけ言葉を知ります。これが正しいですか？もう、わかりましたか？記憶を探して。I know less Japanese than an elementary school child, but in learning how to read, write, and speak a bit of Japanese, which has a writing system so profoundly different than English, I gained quite a great appreciation for human languages and the beauty of communication, and by extension, teaching and learning, which now appear to be highly complex and beautiful in their own right. Currency eventually becomes important, as does the ability to make decisions for large groups of people. There was this man named Plato in ancient Greece. He was a lover of knowledge, a philosopher. He wrote this book called The Republic, which was made up of smaller books, essentially chapters. In one of these earlier chapters or books, Plato describes the reasoning behind the need for war. Here is that passage from the Grube 1894 translation. The land, which was adequate to feed the earlier population, will become small and inadequate instead, shall we say? That is so. We must therefore annex a portion of our neighbor's land if we are to have sufficient pasture and plowland, and they will want to annex a part of ours if they too have surrendered themselves to the limitless acquisition of wealth and overstepped the boundaries of the necessary. Inevitably, Socrates. So, our next step is war, Glaucon. Or what will be the situation? As you describe it. Oh, Plato. Trade eventually becomes important as it is more beneficial to exchange with one's neighbors than to fight and lose lives on both sides. The Silk Road brought together people of all cultures from various regions of the earth. Syncretism defined as the amalgamation or attempted amalgamation of different religions, cultures, or schools of thought emerges. And why shouldn't it? We find each other interesting, and fresh perspectives are always welcome, are they not? Imagine spices you have never tasted. Yum! Fabrics so exotic you have no idea what they're made of. Hmm. And all manner of goods crafted by people from places you can't even imagine. Ooh, how wonderful! I want to take a bit of this culture and a bit of this language and, to use a modern term, remix them in a way that is my own. Imagine all the stories to be told and all the knowledge to be shared, slaves to be bought and sold. Oh no, but could it be currency used to buy people? Hmm, something to think about. The Enlightenment, the movement which emphasized reason and individualism rather than tradition. Why should things in our society or our human civilization remain the way they are? It is impossible today to create a new planet, a new Earth. But the civilization upon its surface was indeed created by human beings. People like to refer to this civilization as a world. For example, that's the way the world is. That's the way the world works. No, the planet is a roughly spherical physical object orbiting a star. It is nearly impossible to change the world that is the planet. We have changed its atmosphere and its climate, but how can we change its orbit or its rotational axis? Why would we want to change such things? Should it be impossible, too, to change the civilization that occupies the surface of the continents? Is that human world, that construct, impossible to change? Why would we want to change such things?